Hello and welcome back to Colonial Crossfire. My name is Willow Hasson, and for this episode, we'll be diving into a specific topic. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a significant impact on the refugee crisis and the daily lives of refugees worldwide. We'll be speaking to Claire Brenner and Uzma Rensha of No Lost Generation, a GW organization founded to support refugees by promoting awareness, fundraising, and creating education resources for the GW community. So to get to the issue itself, what are some overall effects that COVID-19 has on the refugee, migrant, and internally displaced communities?
So I think when thinking about this, it's good to think about the short-term impacts, but also the long-term impacts. So short-term wise, refugees, migrants, and asylum seekers are often in cramped spaces. They have little to no access to water, soap, medical facilities, and it's become incredibly taxing for people who don't have the sanitation supplies to protect them from the pandemic. And it's also become increasingly frustrating for people whose lives have been completely put on hold. And then in terms of like the long-term impacts, just in terms of global poverty, the World Bank estimates that 71 million people could slip into extreme poverty because of the pandemic. A lot of these communities are extremely densely populated and they're already economically deprived. And so the pandemic has just exacerbated a lot of these societal fractures and structural problems like religious differences, caste, ethnic division, stuff like that. And there's also been an exacerbation of the hunger crisis. There's been an 82% increase in extreme hunger since 2019 as a result of the pandemic. So we're seeing a lot of really drastic effects, short-term and long-term, because of this.
So to talk more specifically of policies, can either of you speak on recent Trump administration refugee policies and what they entail?
Yeah, so the Trump administration recently said they would accept only 15,000 refugees for this fiscal year, which is 3,000 lower than last year and the lowest level since 1980. But this cap doesn't actually reflect how many they will admit, it's the maximum number. So the number that they admit is often a lot lower than this. So last year to this fiscal year, we only resettled about 12,000 refugees. And to get a sense of how low that is, in 2016, Obama set the cap at 110,000, and they resettled about 84,000 refugees, 12,000 lone being from Syria. So there's definitely been a huge and dramatic decrease in the number of refugees that the Trump administration is admitting compared to previous years.
Would you say that the COVID-19 situation is accelerating these anti-refugee policies and trends?
I think a number of countries have used COVID-19 as an excuse to adopt even harsher stances against refugees. So Greece has pretty recently been pretty frequent in turning away refugees, but in light of COVID-19, they become more coordinated and aggressive with intercepting boats and then sending them back. Over the summer, Greece, Cyprus, and Hungary prevented asylum seekers from entering their land. Cyprus even now continues to turn away refugees. Many of them are fleeing dire economic situations in places like Lebanon. And this summer, Hungary also temporarily abolished the right to seek asylum, citing coronavirus concerns. Spain also did something similar where they suspended asylum applications, and then Italy and Malta declared their ports unsafe. So you're seeing a lot of people closing their borders, citing health reasons, but a large part of it is anti-immigrant, anti-refugee sentiment.
What is your projection for these kinds of trends? Do you see this continuing? Do you see a turnaround? Just general projection.
I definitely, just in terms of like what Uzma was saying, a lot of this anti-immigrant sentiment is already going on very strong. Like she said, with the border closures, many countries are using COVID-19 as an excuse to just shut out refugees and asylum seekers. And there's also been a lot of negative impacts in refugee camps due to fear from host communities. So we're seeing wire fencing come up around refugee camps. There's been lockdowns of migrant communities. Internet connections have been stopped. SIM cards have been confiscated. So already we're seeing a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment, a lot of fear because of this. And I definitely think that in the future, it will just become more exacerbated. And governments in the past, governments have already been extremely wary of letting in refugees, and I think that the pandemic is serving as a good excuse for them to close down their borders.
How are the refugee support systems and resettlement programs adapting to the safety measures regarding these vulnerable communities in this era of a pandemic?
Yeah, so refugee support programs, in terms of those, social distancing has really restricted the operational capacity of humanitarian operations, and the services and resources are also strained and depleting. And this has caused displaced people to become even more vulnerable. In terms of the refugee resettlement programs, refugees living in the US are most likely living in conditions and going to work in conditions that put them at greater risk of getting COVID-19. And on top of that, they have limited access to healthcare. And in March, the International Organization of Migration announced that they were suspending global resettlement travel for refugees due to COVID-19. The UNHCR has obviously requested that policymakers do not deny people who are in grave danger and who have the right to seek safety and asylum under international law. So yeah, obviously a lot of these programs have been trying to adapt, but there are difficulties doing so.
To focus on the refugees themselves more specifically, do you have any projections or comments on perhaps the long-term mental health effects on these refugees, migrants, and internally displaced communities?
I'm so glad that you've asked that question, because I don't think people understand how disenfranchised migrants are. They face severe psychological challenges because they're often blamed and scapegoated for slumped economies or different troubles that their nation is facing. In light of COVID-19, they're also blamed for increasing cases of the virus and spreading the virus throughout communities they still in.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a shame that this isn't widespread knowledge about the mental health effects and especially just the living conditions in general. Well, thank you again both for your insight and for meeting with us.
Thank you so much, Willow.
Thank you.
For Colonial Crossfire, this is Willow Hasson.